And welcome to the fourth Digital Classicist London seminar for 2016. This week, Stuart Dunn from King's College London is going to talk to us about reading text with GIS, different digital lenses for ancient world geography. And that's the seminar series slide. That's his actual slide. So I'll hand over to Stuart.
Thank you, Gary. Please tell me if you think I start speaking too quietly for the international audience, which is very exciting that they are virtually here. So good afternoon. So this is going to be quite a sort of, well, not unstructured, I hope, but broadly structured presentation of a research project which myself and various others, including Charlotte Rouchet, who is with us here this afternoon, have been working on for the last 2 or 3 years on digital mapping of heritage in Cyprus. But what I really want to do, because as Gabby said, this season's Digital Classicist seminar series has a more pedagogical bent to it, I would like to throw open some questions as to what we might do with resources such as this. And I'm going to attempt to start some discussions around what we might do with digital gazetteer resources by illustrating some extremely early work in progress experiments with geographical information systems that I have done with a subset of the Heritage Gazetteer of Cyprus data. Charlotte has not seen any of this, so I hope you will approve. If you don't, I'm sure you will say so. So, I can use my clicker, can I, without messing up the, okay. So, this speaks to themes of representation and geocultural identity, which is a rather topical subject today, and I will probably just not go very much further than to put this tweet up that came up this morning about the importance of geocultural identity and geocultural representation in the digital age, and also the reference here to, oh, it doesn't work on the screen, great. Okay, this reference to some classic British colonial straight lines for retro effect. Now, of course, the story of Cyprus is the story of classic colonial straight lines, some of them British, some not. Modern Cyprus is a divided and contested landscape. It is one that is subject to present-day occupation of the northern half of the island. So there is a physical divide, but there is also very much a cultural divide, a linguistic divide, and a heritage divide. And these are all things that we have to kind of bear in mind when we are creating structures to map the heritage of a space such as this. Now, the history of attempts to map this space, well, can probably be dated to various points, but one point at which it can be dated to is 1885, when Horatio Kitchener, later better known as Lord Kitchener, Field Marshal Kitchener, the First World War war leader, was commissioned to map the newly acquired overseas British Dominion of Cyprus in order to structure the acquisition of tax and to control kind of census records and so forth. Now, for decades, Kitchener's map was the gold standard for mapping, anywhere really in the British Empire. And it drew on the very latest techniques available at the time by the Ordnance Survey, and indeed those techniques went on to be used to map various other territories in Palestine and various places. But the key point is, this was a moment at which a methodology for imposing precise Cartesian structures on the geography of an island where those had not existed before came about. This was an establishment of cartographic authority for the first time. And the archaeologist Michael Gibbon, who has looked in detail at the history of the mapping of Cyprus, talks of the obsessive demarcation imposed by the British through maps and census, which created difference as well as recording it. The naming of places really matters. It is very powerful. The power to name places or to name anything is extremely fundamental to most other kinds of power, it might be argued. So this, as I say, comes through to the present day. So one has, of course, I'm not going to remember that my little red dot doesn't work on here. So, of course, there is the northern area, as I said, and the southern area, divided by the so-called green line, which on this map, to make life easier, is blue. And even today, you know, if you buy or just pick up a free tourist map at the airport, you will see that the street names are present up until the green line, and they are not present north of it. So, again, this pervades the whole kind of understanding and conception of space and of geography. So these problems are, or sort of framed the approach that we, when I say we, I mean myself, Tassos Papakostas, Charlotte Boucher, and various colleagues that we've worked with, adopted with our Heritage Gazetteer of Cyprus, which was a project funded by the Anastasios Levendis Foundation in, I think, 2013, did we start?
Yeah, I think we got the award in 2012.
12, yeah, we were a bit late starting. And so what they wanted us to do is they wanted us to look at various methods for kind of understanding and mediating space digitally. And this all came out of a wonderful data set of Byzantine churches that Tassos Papakostas, our colleague at King's, had of Byzantine churches, which he wanted to represent online. Now, I will always remember the first question Tassos asked me when we had our first meeting about this project in his office in King's in early 2013, which was, why don't we use Google Earth? Well, why indeed? The main reason we don't use Google Earth is because Google Earth cannot represent change or multiplicity through time. So the place that we know as Nea Paphos has not always been Nea Paphos, either in name or in geographical location. It has both moved and split and broadened geographically, and the way it is spelled and represented in source text changes through time. It is unstable. Google Earth imposes stability. I don't know if they're listening, but that's what you do, guys. Oops. Now, two very key projects in the geography of the ancient world have really sought to address this problem. I refer, of course, to Pleiades and Pelagios projects. And we always have to kind of tip our hats to these projects at the start of any presentations about the Heritage Gazetteer of Cyprus, because it was their intellectual approach, I think it is fair to say, which inspired the Heritage Gazetteer. Pleiades is, of course, an atlas of Greco-Roman antiquity deriving from data from the Barrington Atlas of the ancient world. It is a community-built digital gazetteer which takes place names in the Barrington Atlas and has sort of thrown them out there for development and augmentation by the community. And Pelagios is a exercise in the bringing together of digital gazetteers, of aligning digital gazetteers according to common references to the same places, even though those references may differ semantically and possibly even geographically in different gazetteers. So I always like to illustrate the Pleiades approach with a Bronze Age example, because that is where I am from originally, not from the Bronze Age, but that was my PhD, you know what I mean. So take an example like Santorini, an island some 40 miles to the north of Crete, extremely important in the Bronze Age because of the quality of the preservation of its ruins at Imprimatur, which is down here. But Santorini presents a number of very interesting geo-representational, is that a word? It is now, problems. So as an archipelago, it has 5 islands, Therasia, Thera, Paleokhomeini, Neokhomeini, and Aspronisi. But representing these can be somewhat problematic because they have very dynamic relationships. It's a volcanic archipelago, so it's changed considerably through time. So to create a Pleiades record for Santorini, you would need to start with the archipelago as one single object in a gazetteer, and then below that have 5 individual objects for the 5 individual islands, and then below that have further individual objects for any archaeology on those islands. So to look at what the sort of overarching record for Santorini looks like, there it is. There is the attribution of the author, which in this case is me. There is a universal resource identifier, which is absolutely key to the theory and practice of digital gazetteers, and I'm sure this is something Chiara will be going into in great detail in 2 weeks. The website address of this record comprises of a 9-digit number, rather, which is absolutely unique to that place. This number only refers to the concept of the Santorini archipelago. So just as sas.ac.uk can only be the webpage of the society, I nearly said something completely different there, the School of Advanced Studies. So this number can only conceptually refer to Pleiades. It gives alternate names, and I'm going to come back to that shortly. It gives connections with bigger places. So I know this is too small for you to read, so you'll need to take my word for it. So Cyclades, the Cycladic Islands, and Aegean Mare, the Aegean Sea. And then crucially, it makes these connections with smaller places. So as I was saying, the archipelago is made up of different islands, so Theresia, Thera, Neokhomeini, etc. And they all have separate universal resource identifiers. Now, the interesting question for our purposes is this island here, which again, if I had my pointer and maybe if the screen was a little bigger, you'd be able to see, there is a 6th island on this military British survey map from 1852, which is labeled MicroKhomeini. And there it is, tight little furnace. So what's going on? Well, in 1866, there is an eruption of the volcano, and MicroKhomeini disappears. It becomes part of Paleokhomeini. But it is attested on this map of 1852, so therefore it exists as an information object. And after some discussion with the Pleiades editorial board, it's actually just chopped off. We decided to include this non-existent, in the present day, island as a data object in its own right. Go figure. But this gives an idea of the power of digital gazetteers to represent information structures, to kind of mediate geography, even as in this case, that geography may not actually exist anymore. So back to Cyprus. I'll have a swig of water. So as I was saying, the Heritage Gazetteer of Cyprus was born of this desire to take a Pleiades-like approach to represent the extremely complex and contentious at times and in places, yeah, that's the right word, geography of Cyprus. Again, we fall back on the structure of the URI, the Universal Resource Indicator. And this is an example we've got here of the Geonames.org gazetteer, which is a very key part of the geospatial. Sorry, I'll just stop juggling my keys. That's a very bad habit I have when I'm speaking. Which is a semantic web-mounted gazetteer of modern place names, but which we drew on in various ways, for which I'll come back to shortly. But again, the why not use Google Earth question. What do URIs actually indicate? Places, sites, boundaries, borders, what? In a place like Cyprus, this is far from clear. What I've always said is that where gazetteers like Geonames and indeed like Pleiades tend to be concerned with the representation of very broad geographical areas, like the Greco-Roman world, with a relatively thin layer of data overall, not places like Athens or Rome, but generally a fairly thin layer of data. Cyprus is a small geographical area with a very, very thick layer of data. Lots and lots of attestations. So this question, what do the URIs indicate, really comes to the fore. So the very clunky classification we came up with was, well, actually tripartite, not bipartite. So 3 different layers of complexity that we have used. Now, the first is what we call historical units. Every historic unit has a URI. A historic unit is an entity of substantial geographical extent, like a town or an archaeological site, or indeed a kingdom. Essentially, anything, I think it's fair to say, that does not have a spatial footprint of its own, like a building. Things that do have a spatial footprint of its own, like a building, we call an archaeological entity. Now, these are, as we say, discrete features with distinct spatial footprints, which are formed in a definable period. The archaeologists in the room who have worked with a single context recording system will might see where we were coming from with this. A single context in the single context recording system is a piece of physical evidence which was created and deposited at a distinct period in history. It can be kind of linked in a structure. So that was our kind of reasoning. Now, we had a lot of discussions about how these should be represented cartographically on the map. Historical units, we decided after a great deal of discussion, should be represented as a kind of abstract polygon, which, even though it doesn't have a definable spatial footprint of its own, is nonetheless represented as a kind of conceptual polygon on the map. It is an abstraction, and I think it's fair to say that we have never claimed that it's anything other than an abstraction. But the spatial footprint, the representation on the map, isn't really what's important here. What's important here is that everything that we, in our editorial judgment, have decided is a historic unit gets its own universal resource identifier. So here we have cyprusgazetteer.org/HU for historic unit, then a unique number. This then comes into not conflict, but into complexity, if you like, with the fact that every historic unit is bound to have different names in different texts at different times. So here we have Nea Paphos again, which is the HU I was talking about before, which in a previous text is referred to, spelled, attested, that's what I'm looking for, as Bapho. So Nea Paphos, the unique historic unit with the multiplicity of names, has a separate extension to the URI, which is another number after the 17. So the 17 identifies it as the concept of Nea Paphos. The number after that, 68 in this case, identifies this as the instance of Nea Paphos called Bapho. Now, for the archaeological units, the smaller entities, we adopt a slightly different approach. These are represented as points. Now, the reasoning there is that we, I suspect, didn't really have the capacity to identify precisely these precise spatial footprints of archaeological entities. Rather, we knew that they were just an entity on their own and so could be safely represented as point data. AEs draw on the Geonames gazetteer that I referred to before, because they always correspond to modern place names. Modern place names are all in Geonames, so we have a kind of ready-made unique identifier there. So obviously that's the development URL, so please don't use that if you have to look at these slides. It shouldn't be like that at all. So it should be cyprusgazetteer.org/the Geonames ID for the place, and then our unique number for the place after that. This is the case of the Sanctuary 1 at Nea Paphos, the Sanctuary of Aphrodite, which is the Bronze Age Sanctuary, I believe. Sanctuary 2 is the Classical period one. Classical period, yes, thank you. So, we try to get away a little bit from this messy business of mapping in Cartesian space. And I could go on for hours about mapping in Cartesian space, but you'll be glad to know I'm not going to. And I'll move straight on to our solution for the kind of informational aspect of these places. Every one of these places has at least one attestation, at least one piece of textual evidence that says it was called this at that time. And this is really treated just like a cartobibliography. This is a bibliography of places. So we have default toponym, which I'll come back to shortly. This is Paphos. The source is Luke the Evangelist. We have a Viath link for the authors, page number, anything that you're going to come across in a bibliography, basically. And then the same for all the other attestations below. But in every case where the source is available online, we provide a direct link to the source. So this is really using the kind of power of the web to say, this is where the evidence is coming from. This is a reference in Perseus, of course. So it is really all about authority. So where, or rather how, do we handle those authorities in the modern period? Well, every single place has what we call a default toponym. And the default toponym is derived from, well, we started out by simply using the complete Gazetteer of Cyprus, which is a 1987 United Nations publication, which has the official approved Greek, English, and Turkish names for every site, agreed that is by the present day authorities. There is a refinement to the CGC that was published later, the Otigos.
Yes.
2007. So this came out in digital form, and we've sort of incorporated that in various different ways. But our kind of default position is that the actual name of each site comes from the United Nations approved document. Any of the historic attestations, or indeed the archaeological attestations, we essentially don't treat if they are any later than 1918. So the CGC is the only post-1918 reference that we use, and I will come back to the reasons for 1918 shortly. So yes, every single link, as I say, every single attestation, as I say, has the imprimatur of a particular publication. So here we have a publication describing Aphrodisian. Here we have the representations of David Hogarth's Aphrodisian right there. And again, the date. So everything is completely transparent as to where it's come from. What do we do for time? Okay, not too badly. So this allows us to construct kind of what you might think of as hierarchies on the fly. So in Heritage Gazetteer of Cyprus terms, the representation of Larnaca, very much a modern place, would simply be cyprusgazetteer.org/ then a Geonames URI for Larnaca with no further refinement. This is, I believe, the reference to Sanctuary 1 of Aphrodite at Nea Paphos. Sorry, this is Nea Paphos, not Sanctuary of Aphrodite. So you have cyprusgazetteer.org/HU/ the Geonames ID signaling the modern term of the, the modern presence, not the modern term of the AE, then a unique number to indicate the name. Another name, 001, so that would be another derivation, that would be the actual derivation of Paphos. 002 is Paphos in Greek, and so on, and so on. The same of the true of the Church of St. Mamas at Yali, so that represents the fact that this is a unique archaeological entity, this is the name of the archaeological entity, etc., etc. So, I was actually doing some research on the history of spatial humanities recently for other purposes, and I came across a conference poster that Tom Elliott and Sean Gillis, the coordinators of Pleiades, in which they describe Pleiades as an un-GIS for the ancient world. So I thought that was a very interesting terminology. So how is this un-GIS of ancient, well, not ancient, but medieval through to early modern Cyprus that we've created how could it be linked to a GIS? So this is what I've been looking at for the last few weeks. And I decided, after some consultation with colleagues, to look at the Historic Monuments of Cyprus by George Everett Jeffery, who died in 1935, and I believe was curator of ancient monuments in the colonial administration. This is a very key work in the study of Cypriot heritage, and this is why I selected as a title for this talk a new lens for ancient geography, because Jeffery is providing us with a lens for ancient geography, or historical geography at least, through his description, this very encyclopedic description of Cypriot monuments that he produced. And this is the cutoff point for our attestation dates in the Gazetteer. So 1918, the publication. This is the last kind of authority, the latest authority, I say, that we would look at. So I had the great pleasure of going out to Cyprus in May of last year. I'm working with a fantastic group of students at the University of Nicosia on creating data for the HGC. You know, they were all working with texts of various descriptions. And all those texts have place names. So essentially, we were able to get them to start inputting those place names into the HGC format. And at least one of them, probably more, was working on Jeffery and his text. So we have a lot of Jeffery place names in the HGC. And if you do a kind of global advanced search for Jeffery, that's what it looks like. See, we have a great blend of historical units and archaeological entities, which you can see a little bit more clearly if you look at the Google Earth representation. But it's still a little bit messy. It's still a little bit acritical, as some might say. So I thought I would investigate some close reading of certain passages of Jeffery's text using the QuantumGIS platform. And I thought I would start with, just fairly randomly, this section, chapter 9, his writing on Nicosia, Pera, Politico, and Macharas. So there are, I found 17 key place names that come up in this 3 or 4 page passage, which we decided to, or I decided to kind of look into in a bit more detail. And I thought, well, we've got these representations in the HGC, you know, what can we kind of do to give those gazetteer entries a little more context, a little more geocultural context, if you will. Now, there are quite a few resources out there that can help us tie data that we produce in the course of our research with environmental and topographical information. This is one such source. It's the United States Geographical Survey and I think the Japanese Ministry of Education. It's a kind of jointly funded, jointly facilitated satellite mission. And it is a free global data set of 30-meter accuracy of topographic elevation. And the Cypriot chunk of it looks something like this. Well, not something like this. This is it. So what I did is I began by mapping the 17 references that we have on that chapter 9 of Jeffery's Monuments of Cyprus, and kind of reprojecting both the raster data file and the vector data file into a common universal transverse Mercator projection system, which is capable of supporting GIS analysis. And the first question I thought I would ask is, well, Jeffery himself traveled this route, so what can he see from these places? So one can construct a viewshed study, which is this. Essentially, the kind of blue patches you can see there is a raster rendering of what is visible from these places. So, I mean, you can see there's a kind of barrier being formed by the Troodos Mountains here, I guess. He makes references to these 2 monasteries. I know it's far too small for you to be able to see, but he actually refers in the text to the fantastic view that you get from them. So, you know, we can start kind of remediating that a little bit. But what seems interesting is the way one can actually start considering the Gazetteer entries as kind of aspects of landscape rather than just aspects of kind of textual tradition and so forth. You can dig into this a little more with the individual raster layers for each of the places, and just what's going on the side here. I included the data view here. This at the bottom is the raster from the satellite topography, so it goes from 0 to 120, which I guess means sea level at 0 meters to 120 meters, which I assume must be the highest point of Cyprus. And there, for each of the viewshed places, you have a 1 or a 0 value, i.e. this area can be seen from it or it can't be. So, you know, that's the way that sort of works. The other thing one can play with is an intervisibility analysis, so which places can be seen from each other. So what one has here is a set of renderings of, I think, 10,000 meters I set it at, to see exactly how far one can see from each of the points, and it's refined a little bit on this overlap analysis of the invisibility viewshed. So you can see that there is a lot of potential invisibility in the central section there, much less at Perichorio, Nicosia, and so on. One can also play with terrain profiling to get a sense of the journey that Jeffery made through the landscape while he was doing this. So even I can't read that, so you'll have no chance. But I can describe it for you, and you can look at the nice statistics. So he starts at Nicosia and goes as far as Pera here, so you can see the kind of climb through topography he had to make. This is not distance, by the way, this is decimal degrees, so you know, just bear that in mind. And so for different sections of the journey he describes, you know, you can see exactly where he was, you know, where in terms of elevation he was at each point. So, really, I mean, I think what I'm trying to sort of get at with this is at a very early stage, and I'm working with some students at the moment to kind of get more of Jeffery's stuff into the Heritage Gazetteer of Cyprus. I mean, a lot of it is in there at the moment, but it needs a certain amount of mashing about and treating and so forth to get it into a QGIS platform. This is very much something that I'm wanting to kind of expand and build on, and to think about how we might use not just topographic analysis, but other kinds of quantitative GIS methods to understand the relationships between these places. Now we've gone to the trouble of mapping them and getting them into the HGC. How one might, for example, map the densities of different kinds of attestation at different points in history, etc., etc. I think of it as a kind of process that goes from universal resource indicators in text or on the page to URIs from text and in the landscape. You know, that's the kind of next step, I believe, that fairly or more conventional types of GIS analysis of the kinds that I've just been showing can maybe take us. So, I mean, you know, as I say, the Heritage Gazetteer of Cyprus came out to a sense of the work of Pleiades and Pelagios, but I think there are various different ways that kind of work can be taken forward, that kind of textual starting point can be built upon, and I'm sort of that's really what my research is about at the moment. And I'd like to finish up, I think a little early, but I guess I'm nearly there, with this quote from Franco Moretti, when he talks about placing a literary phenomenon in a specific space, mapping it is not the conclusion of geographical work, it's the beginning, after which it begins, in fact, the most challenging part of the whole enterprise, which one looks at the map and thinks. Now, of course, Moretti is one of the key figures in the quantitative use of cartography to interrogate texts. Some people buy that, some don't. But I think this idea of thinking about maps is absolutely critical, and to get more out of these wonderful resources that are being built and being developed, that's really where we need to go. And I think GIS can be of some help. So, thank you.
So I'll turn off the live broadcast here because this isn't going to be able to pick up the whole room anyway, but we'll have discussion in just a second.